Good morning everybody, and thanks for coming back. So today what we're going to do is we're going to continue on our shed build. We are building the front wall, framing it out for the door, and we're going to build the door at the exact same time. If you guys haven't seen the other videos in this build series, go ahead and check them out. I'll have them linked down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, last wall. So now when it comes to framing out a front wall, we're going to attack this guy a little bit differently than the rest. Now like I said before, we can always add more sticks to the walls. Generally you don't really want to take any out. So I know I want my door to be dead center. This is a 10-foot wall, so I'm going to make my mark 5 feet, and I'm going to put my C back in there. So this is the center of my wall. I want my door to be 48 inches, so I'm going to measure back both directions 2 feet, and that'll give me a 48-inch opening, and then I can end up framing out the rest of my wall from there. Okay, so I've already gone over the basics of framing in the floor and the walls video, so I'm not going to get into too much detail on that in this video here. However, this wall is different because we are starting with our door and working our way out. Now you'll notice my first mark here on the outsides of where my door opening is, I put a J, and that's going to be my jack stud, and that holds up the door header. Then I measured past 1.5 inches from there, and I made a K, and that's going to be your king stud, which goes floor to ceiling in the wall. After that, I measured in towards the center from each end of the wall at my regular 16 3/4 inch mark, and then made my X on the back side where my 16-inch mark actually landed, and that will give me my regular 16-inch spacing for the studs in the wall. Now speaking of my studs, I cut them off camera, and I cut them to 87 inches long. Now unlike a lot of things where I said I pulled the measurement out of thin air, this one I did for a reason. That's so I can use an entire 4x8 sheet of plywood standing vertically on the front wall without having to do any cutting. You'll also notice in this wall, I didn't add my jack studs yet. I've only got my outside sticks, my king studs in the middle, and then my regular 16-inch studs between that. I also didn't sheet the wall like I had the rest of them. This one I'm going to sheet standing up. So go ahead, slide the wall into place, and then I attached it to the floor first. Now I only added 1 screw on my outside stud location, but in between my regular wall stud and my king stud, I added 2 screws on both sides just for a little bit more stability in the floor. Now we can pull the side walls together just like the back wall before. So we're going to pull them tight together towards each other, and that'll actually self-square everything. Then I moved to the outside using some of my short screws, and I pinned my sheeting material to my front wall studs. Then moving back inside, going through the corner again from one wall to the other using our 3-inch screws, we can lock the wall together about every 18 inches down. Now once you have everything 100% fastened and screwed into place, we can go ahead and remove our bottom plate for our doorway. Now I'm just using a Sawzall here. This is by far the easiest way to do it, but a handsaw will also work. But as soon as you get through the 2x4, stop, because we don't want to cut into our flooring material too deep. You're going to touch it, but that's not a big deal. Don't try cutting it out beforehand either, because it's going to make the wall really wobbly, and standing it up will be a nightmare. So make sure to cut it out after the fact. Now these 2x4s here are going to be my jack studs. I'm cutting them to 80 inches long, and this is going to set the height of my doorway. The reason I'm using pressure treated is if any wind and feels like blowing snow and water in and around the doorway, these are rot resistant, so I'm not too worried about it then. Now about every 18 inches down, I'm adding 2.5 inch screws to fasten it to my king studs, and then I'm also adding a pressure treated header. Now I don't know why I thought that that was going to work, because I'm not 80 inches tall, so get yourself a ladder and then finish actually attaching it the proper way. Now this pressure treated header is nothing but a cosmetic header panel. The actual structural header that we're going to use is this right here. Now it's a couple of 2x6s and some of the scrap 1/2 inch OSB from the walls. I used one of the 2x6s itself to actually strike a line and then cut it out, giving me a piece that is literally the same width as the 2x6 itself. From there, we're going to make a big sandwich. So using a bunch of 3-inch screws to make sure this guy never comes apart, we're going to attach all 3 boards together. Then this is going to go above our cosmetic header. It's going to stand vertically, and that's going to allow our top plates to transfer the weight of the roof down into this header itself. Because this is a structural piece that's going to resist bowing, it'll transfer its own weight into the jack studs and then into the floor. Once you slide the header into place, go ahead and add 3 screws on each side into each 2x6 through your king studs and into the end of the header. Now we need some that'll actually transfer the weight from the plate down into the header. So just like before, I'm measuring in from the outside on each end, and I'm just making my regular mark where my 16-inch studs would have landed normally in the wall. Then, because I have a perfect 1.5 inch gap left over, I'm just cut a couple of scrap pieces of 2x4 and then slid them into place and screwed them down. Okay, now for those of you who are wondering how we're going to sheet the wall standing up, this is how we're going to do it. Taking a couple of your 3-inch screws, add them between your flooring skid as well as your floor rim joist. That's going to act as a shelf for us to rest the sheeting on, so we don't have to try and hold it up as well as square everything up at the exact same time. Once you have it setting in place, go ahead and push the walls together and then add a screw through the sheeting into the stud and pin it together. Then make sure to walk away all cool like, mostly because you forgot more screws. And then go back and pin the rest of the corners and add the rest of the screws across the top, the bottom, the sides, as well as into all of your necessary studs. Then it's just a simple case of rinse and repeat for the other side. Now we are going to have a gap in between our two boards though, so again, just using more scraps, measure and cut out a piece and pin it in place. Now we still have a lot of OSB in our face because our 48-inch door right now is only 24 inches, so we got to cut that out. And the best tool for the job in this case is going to be the trusty old Sawzall again. So if you don't have one, find somebody who does and beg and borrow it, trade for it, do whatever you got to do, because this is the best way to cut out the doorway. So with our wall 100% complete, now we need a door to stuff in it. So I've got another sheet here of 1/2 inch thick 4x8 OSB. Now this I'm cutting down to be a 1/2 inch smaller in both dimensions than my door opening itself. So 47.5 inches as well as 79.5 inches. Now this will give me a 1/4 inch reveal all the way around for the door, which is perfect for a shed. With my 2x4s cut to size and flushed up in place, I'm going to add 2 screws into each corner from the bottom side. Then I can flip the door over and finish screwing it down from the top side through the sheet into the 2x4s. Now at this point, the door's still going to have a lot of twist and flex and wobble to it, which is not ideal. We got to stiffen it up yet. So what we're going to do is add a cross brace. Now I've got this 2x4 sitting about centered in the door. It's about the same distance from the top and the bottom on each end. And I flushed up one corner. Looking down, I made a mark flush with the inside of my 2x4 on the door itself, and then I freehand cut out that angle. I set it back in place. I double checked that the other side angle was still good, and then I cut the opposite angle out as well. Made sure it was sitting about centered back in the door where it was before, and I'm just toenailing a screw in. Now to really add a bunch of rigidity to the door, we're going to lock all of our 2x4s together. So a pocket hole jig would work, but if you don't have one, this is a good way to do it too. We're going to make our own pocket holes. So using a 1/2 inch drill bit in our drill, starting about 1.5 inches back from the end of our 2x4, drill down about 1/4 inch. Then with the drill still going, start tilting it at a 45-degree angle and then push it into the wood about 3/4 inch, and that gives you your own pocket hole where you can stuff a 3-inch screw into, and this will lock all of the 2x4s together, which will really stiffen up the door a lot. With the inside of the door finished, we can work on trimming out the outside of the door. Now I've got a 5/4 by 6-inch pressure treated deck board here. Now if you have a table saw, you can rip it in half going that way. Honestly, I just lined up the 2.5 inch mark on the guide of my circular saw with the outside of the board and ripped it in half that way. Whatever works for you. Then I cut them down to length and screwed them onto the outside of the door. Again, 2 screws on each end, and then 1 screw about every 12 inches up the center of the board, the length of the door. Then we can put our top and our bottom boards in place. Now I'm just using the door itself to mark my lengths to make sure they're absolutely perfect. And you'll notice I'm putting the rounded edges of my 5/4 boards to the inside of the door. That way my outside edges all have the cut ends, which gives my door a very nice square profile on the outside. Now again, because this is pressure treated material, we want to use the correct treated screws, but I'm using 2.5 inch long screws here as well, and that'll just make sure that it goes through the deck board, the OSB, and into the 2x4, again, just tying everything together and making it very rigid. Then we can mount our hinges. Now, I would suggest either adding 4 hinges or slightly larger hinges that I did. The door hasn't moved yet and it's been 7 months, but overall longevity, I may want either a bit beefier or a couple more hinges in here. Now I just measured down from the top 8 inches and up from the bottom 8 inches, and then central throughout the rest of the door with the rest of the hinges, again using treated 2.5 inch screws. Now I know I jumped ahead here, don't yell at me, there's a roof in place, ignore that part. We're going to mount the door for now. Now again, using another 5/4 by 6 inch deck board that I ripped in half, I'm going to add some trim around the door. So I've measured from the top of the door jamb itself all the way to the bottom of my sheeting material on the door, and I'm adding my trim. Now in this case, I'm using 3.5 inch long screws to go through the trim, the OSB, and into the jack stud behind there to really lock everything into place, because the weight of the door is going to be hanging off of this, so we want it good and sturdy. And make sure you have a quality control inspector so everything goes smoothly. Now the eagle-eyed out there might notice on the shed I've actually flipped the trim. So I've actually got the rounded edges from the 5/4 boards facing in towards the door, and the squared off edges where the saw cut it facing out. Once I had the other piece of trim installed, I just added the header panel and grabbed a measurement from the outside edge to the outside edge of the trim and screwed that into place, and the bottom piece fit inside of the trim. Now, using a couple of shims that are 1/4 inch thick, we can go ahead and rest the door on that to mount it. Now again, remember, we've got a 1/4 inch reveal all the way around, so this will make sure that my top and bottom reveal is identical. But to get the door centered in the frame, once you've got it in place, my dad just stuffed a shim, and again, another 1/4 inch thick, in between the door and the frame on the other side, and that allowed me to screw the hinges into place, knowing full well that everything was centered and perfect all the way around the door. Sorry, it was getting kind of dark here as well. There was a snowstorm that was supposed to blow in 2 days, so I was getting really rushed to get this guy finished. So I had to make use of the dwindling daylight that I had. Now one final thing I did off camera was I took some of the 1/2 inch OSB and I ripped some 1.5 inch wide strips, and I added a door stop. Now that was literally just ripping it down, closing the door, standing on the inside of the shed, and using some of the short screws to just screw it to the frame. And as you can see from the inside, when you close the door, it seals up nice and tight. Alright everybody, and that is it for this video. It's really that simple. It's finally starting to come together. The only thing we got left to do is little trim details and our roof. So the next video we're going to do the roof itself, but otherwise I really honestly hope you guys are following along, building something like this for yourself, because that is just the coolest thing ever. If you guys do, hit me up, let me know. Thumbs up the video and send me some comments down below. Pictures, everything would be awesome. I'd really appreciate it. But with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for checking it out.